get one customer and things like that. So I was hoping that you might have had a bit of experience and be able to just say, okay, well, if I now just want to be able to do a film, it's exactly the same. But the solutions for the show customer are also there. When you look on the main page, you'll see these sort of two things. If I just sort of go back to the Ajax ones. You've got an Ajax data file. The ones that end in exercises are the solutions to the exercises. So there, the Ajax exercises is the one that talks about customer. And it'll look pretty similar to the cities one. They just format the data in slightly a different way. But to pick up on, that's really sort of dealing there with this controller and model. The viewer, the thing that it passes it over to, you're passing it this film or films data. They're inside the request block. So long as the viewer picks up those, it can deal with them. Now, if we look in the Ajax data one, you can see that it's invoking the JSP from the Web Info Results folder. So underneath Web Info Results, there you can see, say, the XML one. Now, this is one way of doing it. These things are the curly braces. So it's got a curly brace, or the dollar curly brace is JSP for saying get this variable out of the request block. So that is looking for a variable called cities. It knows it's an array, so going to part 2 and getting the name component of it. Now that's one way of creating your XML. That's creating sort of 5 lines of XML. But you can see, hopefully, the idea it should offend the programmer in you. If ever you're repeating things like that, you should look to be using some sort of loop mechanism. Or better, to use a library that does it. And that's where the JAX-B library will help you in that. It can take an object such as a list of cities or a list of films and auto-generate the XML. And similarly, we've got one for the JSON, the original one. This was before we'd sort of done much to do with it. This is trying to generate JSON. Got all these sort of curly braces in, but saying, okay, out of the incoming cities object, get the 4th one's population and put that in there. Now that's fine if you're doing 5 cities there. If you're doing 2,000 films, obviously not the right sort of approach to take. So there you want to be using something like JSON. Now I've given you an example of that on the Moodle page about how to use JSON in this JSP file to generate your output, and the same thing with JAX-B. A key thing is that is just a controller. This is the viewer. The controller doesn't do anything to do with formatting. If you're mixing up viewer code inside here, you've got the wrong sort of concept. Yes, it will work. And that's often a thing that I sort of get coming back to people. But it worked. You know, why isn't that enough? It's just not enough. I mean, and you know the old Trabant cars that came from Yugoslavia or something like that. They used to get you from A to B, but they're nowhere near as good as a Rolls Royce to sort of get you from one place to another. There's better ways of doing these things. Things that need less maintenance, can easily be amended. And this sort of approach means that you should have that viewer in. So what I wouldn't like to see, and I'm saying this because I have pointed it out to sort of some people already, is to say, well, look, once you get this cities back, then generate the XML in here. Even if it's using JSON and sending it back, it should be passing it over to this sort of viewer. Now, it might only seem a small point and a bit pernickety, but that's keeping in with that sort of general concept. Just like it's better to send a whole film or list of films. This is a concept of using something called a data transfer object. It's another design pattern where instead of passing multiple parameters, you wrap them all up in an object and set that. It just seems an obvious good technique to do. And that's what these design patterns are. They're just good things to do. A recognition that this is the right way to write your code in general. And that's what's coming out in your final part to this, when you're doing your critical evaluation, to show what good techniques you're using in here. Now, I've highlighted some, but there'll be quite a few others that hopefully you're using, good sort of software engineering techniques about where things are happening and why you're doing it. And yes, there's quite a large set of marks available for that. Just trying to find who it is. So that's sort of covering these bits about getting your sort of data. This access to the data using a REST type interaction, that will be changing this controller to a RESTful one. Now you need to work off that thing that you did, or hopefully did, last week. There was a RESTful type interface to accessing, I think it used a to-do object, but it's the same sort of idea. You just sort of access, in this case, a film object rather than the object that's shown in the demo. So you'll just create a RESTful controller, but you can still use your model and still use your viewer to send it back. Only sort of change one. Whereas using this is what you did in your Ajax jQuery type ones. And again, just finally, because we're sort of coming to the last sort of couple of minutes, in this existing one, this Ajax data one, it put in a request, but then when the results came in, you had to do something with it. I think that was in the things like this client application has to create a request, either of this sort of format, or perhaps a RESTful one later on. So you'll see bits of code in there where it's building together a URL, getting a city table, picking something up off the data input field, what's the address that it's calling, what are the parameters that it's passing over, and then doing that invocation. That's the calling part, but then when it comes back, things like the show ones, there's ones to create the call and then ones to deal with it coming back. This one in the show date JSON says, okay, this thing is coming back, get the response text, just evaluate it as a JSON string. That's really the sort of thing that you do with JSON, saying to JSON. And if you just say, okay, data is evaluate the raw JSON string that's coming in, you can then access the headings or the cities out of that. And there's some sub-methods, get table, to sort of build this table up. But the idea being that the client app is receiving that JSON XML and then extracting out the data and displaying it. So that's where you're being assessed on your knowledge of using these Ajax JavaScript calls to actually invoke the other side. Now that's where jQuery might help you, or some other JavaScript library, to help you do some of those calls so you don't have to have as much code in it. So hopefully that's an idea of what your model is going to look like. If you can have your assignment based around that sort of structure, you're on the right tracks for it. And you can just take these examples as an example for each stage that you're doing, whether it's building the very basic one, based around that Ajax data, whether or not you're building your client app, look to that Ajax data front end there as well, whether or not you're making this thing move over to a cloud-based one, look at the JDO and JPA examples there, or whether you're changing the controller to be a RESTful one, that example that we did last week. So there's an example for each state that you're going through, each actual section of the assignment. The only thing that possibly there isn't too much example for is this final part about this critical analysis part. But in the bit about how to get started, it's about a 4-page document, and 2 of the pages are devoted to that critical assessment of sort of what sort of things to look into there. That's where I'll judge the quality of your code. That's where I'll decide how good that code of yours actually is, according to what good software engineering techniques are, and whether or not you've just got something that works. Because there's a wide range in between. Deliverables, 1 project probably per section, I'd say. Just zip it up and put it into one big zip file, together with any other sort of report that you've got, like your critical analysis. Just one sort of file. And again, there's 1 or 2 people who do insist on giving me in RAR format. I know it's a popular format on some sort of platforms and the like, but try to stick to convention. Give it in zip, give me a PDF, not ODT, not DOC.